Hello, Tom. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. How are you?
No complaints. Another beautiful day in paradise. Poe, knock it off. Sorry about that. Oh, you
It's all
don't
good.
say. So talk to me. Tell me what's up with the system and how everything's performing.
Everything's good. Right now, I'm in big prep mode to switch over another flower room to Horizonal beds. It's the same room basically as I'm running right now. It's 1,000 square foot room. It's 20 by 50, and the canopy is 16 by 45. So basically, I have 4 beds of 4 by 45. So yeah, it's working great in the first room I tried it in. So I'm trying to do the kind of the same thing in my second room, but improvements basically. So
Nice.
yeah, before we get into it, I wanted to mention that usually you guys have on the podcast experts in a certain domain, and I'm my expertise is just growing. It's not necessarily a particular subject matter in soil per se, but I'd love to have the audience maybe join in on at some point maybe some grower questions that I might be able to get into and answer.
Yeah.
So I'd be right into that. But basically, as I was saying, I have a room right now that I'm running horizontal beds. It's working great. I would like to improve it. And the only improvement that I would really like to make, we had a conversation privately about it, is that some cultivars in my horizontal system show deficiencies. I would say maybe 50%. And it's a really particular deficiency that I would say affects yield zero. It doesn't affect quality. Really, it doesn't affect anything but the look of big fan leaves. So to give you an idea of what it sort of looks like, um, the leaves tend to have a little curl in them, and there's a bit of rust kind of spots and a bit of yellowing going. And I've grown a lot in potting mixes, and I've seen different deficiencies, different symptoms, but I've never quite seen exactly this. I'm re-amending after crops. My biology is really on point. Everything's really on point. Everything in general is going really well, and that's why I'm doing the horizontal system in my next room. And it's like I said, I'm just kind of guessing here, but it's maybe 50% of cultivars showing these symptoms, and the other 50% not at all. And that being said, in the room that is currently in just potting soil, I never see that symptom. So it tells me that it's most likely caused in the A horizon. And my main hypothesis is the pH of that horizon. And when I've been growing for a long time in just potting mixes, organic potting mixes, and I wasn't really conscious of it, but my pH was always on point, or so I think, because I've been testing the pH of my potting mixes, and they are, let's say, between 6.2, 6.8 kind of thing. Now, the sand, silt, and clay that I used for my A horizon, again, I wasn't conscious of soil pH, and that stuff was 5.2, very acidic, right? And another observation that I have is all through veg in the horizontal soil, I see zero symptoms. I get a perfect veg, and I get a perfect pre-flower. So the 3 weeks of flower. So these symptoms just tend to show up 3 weeks in. And you know what, man? Like 3 weeks in, a lot of growers would take off all fan leaves. Like that's a common technique. So if you would take off all fan leaves, like some growers do, you wouldn't even see what I'm talking about. Okay. So all of this kind of leads me to believe that that 5.2 soil pH is giving me that symptom. And I don't know your opinion on this, but I think that maybe it could very well be cultivar dependent. What kind of effects that soil pH would have on different cultivars? They would react differently. So I'm really focusing my next A horizon. I'm focusing on pH. I'm focusing also on really having the proper sand, silt, and clay organic matter percentages. But also, I want to focus more on the Malic 3 and the saturated paste test results that I'm getting from this A Horizon 2, because that's another thing that I didn't really look into. I just looked into ratios, basically, first time around. Now, I've been doing a lot of testing outside in the yard too, in pots, and taking different ratios of sand, silt, and clay, for example, and saturating it with water, seeing what happens, then seeing what happens with different amounts of organic matter, really drenching it, see how it feels, and see how it feels as it's drying, and also seeing how it feels when it's bone dry. So one of my big observations that I've had is when it's straight sand, silt, and clay organic matter with straight sand, silt, and clay without organic matter. When I drench it, it usually takes a lot of time for the water to really absorb. And when the water has fully absorbed, if I try to put my finger in there, it's incredibly dense. It's incredibly hard. There's no fluffiness. I can't put my finger in. If I take the same sand, silt, and clay, and I put in 20% organic matter, totally different. The water goes through faster, easier, and it doesn't compact as much. So let's say I fill a pot of just sand, silt, and clay without organic matter. Let's say that pot is give or take 10 inches deep. I fill it up. If I really saturate it with water, I was really surprised to see like it can go down a good 20%, like 2 inches. It does that a little bit less with organic matter. It still compacts quite a bit. And that observation really sort of made me realize how important no-till must be, and keeping those root zones in the soil to hold things together to really avoid that compaction that I'm seeing. Because again, this is just soil put in a pot without a plant. So anyways, I could go on with observations like that, but I guess everything that you've been teaching on your podcasts, I've just been trying to experience it in real life and really see it, like that compaction that I'm seeing without plants and without organic matter. It's not surprising, but I'm happy to really, I find it's really a learn experience to really see it in real life, and to see the effects that it has on soil, adding organic matter. That being said, another thing too that I think I want to improve in my A Horizon is putting a little bit more sand to have the water absorb through a little bit more. So I think maybe I was lacking a little bit of sand. So it's mostly making sure that I have enough organic matter, I have enough sand, and my pH is more on target. What do you think?
So let's back it up for a second. So the cultivars that's showing this phenomenon,
Yeah.
are they of the same lineage? They're similar mothers and fathers.
Yeah, yes and no, Leighton, because what you have to realize about modern cannabis is that it's very bottlenecked. And if you go down the family tree of most modern weed, it comes down to the same building blocks. And those building blocks are, audience, correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty much Girl Scout cookies, right? So what happened when, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 main cultivars of cookies that were discovered. I don't know my precise history. Let's say 12 years ago or something, maybe a little longer. Uh, it really gives a look to cannabis, and it makes cannabis look so frosty and so exotic that it's difficult, to be honest, to grow anything without that in the genetic. Okay, so what I'm getting at is it's not the same mother and father, no, not at all, but everything's really closely related. I don't know if people, the general public that buys cannabis, realizes that, but it's a fact.
You know, that's interesting. I think that's probably what drove Kev to go over to Pakistan and grab some land raised seeds to bring back to start weaving in some fresh genetic material into the scene. I know
Well,
he's
yeah, Kevin is always talking about this stuff, and he's totally right. Uh, my last grow, I took a gamble. We'll see how it does in the market. I grew something with no cookies in the genetics. Um, I appreciate cannabis probably on a different angle as just the general consumer. So although it doesn't have that modern look, I like the look because I like variety. But we'll see if the general public accepts it, because in the last few years, I think the standards for bag appeal is just it's just way up there. Cannabis just looks crazy now. So if there's definitely, yeah, I'm seeing in the cookies in a lot for sure. Canadian market is very cookies gelato dominant. Yeah, exactly. It's almost all cookies gelato. And what is gelato? Gelato is cookies. Like, go down the family tree, boom. It's what the forum cut, animal cookies, the OG Kush Breath, which is also considered a cookies pheno, I think. And when I'm referring to cookies, I'm not referring to the cookies brand. Like the cookies brand just, in my opinion, took advantage of the popularity of Girl Scout cookies. Had nothing to do with making those cultivars. But yeah, that's what it's all about. Whether you're talking about wedding cake or the gelatos or do-si-do, or like the list goes on. Everything that is hype, everything that's popular has cookies.
interesting.
Yeah, I bet you could just show me weed, okay, and I could tell you if there's cookies or not.
Interesting. Now,
There's just something about the look.
so what is that cultivar that you're growing now that's different? Well, what is?
It's just one cultivar that I grew in a half room. I grew 2 beds of it, and it's a back cross of a strain called I-95. Do you know what that is?
No.
I-95 is two pretty famous breeders from, I think, New York. It's called Top Dog Seeds, and
Okay.
Top Dog mostly specializes in older genetics, like mostly the chem dogs and the sour diesel side of things. So I-95 is a big cross of, correct me if I'm wrong, audience, but it's chem dog, it's triangle kush, it's sour diesel. And that was back crossed by a cultivar called Trey Dog. So anyway, it's more going back to really dank weed from the 90s. Um, there's nothing doughy, there's nothing sweet like cookies would have. It's far, far, far from smelling like candies. So yeah, we'll see if the public likes it or not. I love growing it. I love smoking it. It gives me a different high than everything else. I really enjoy it, but we'll see what happens.
What is the high like? Is it a little bit more pick me up, or is it more mellow down?
The way that I would describe it is basically, I'm honestly a lot better at describing the smoke itself and the taste itself than the high. I'll be honest with you, but it's really strong. I find basically,
Okay. So
yeah.
what is the taste? Is it skunky?
Um, for me, it's more on the gassy side, but a lot of cookies is gassy. But this type of gassiness is very different. Okay, you kind of have to smell it to really describe it. It's the opposite of cookies, pretty much, as far as smells. Yeah, I'm sorry, Leighton. That's a tough one to describe. Like when you're describing cookies, genetics, terpene profiles, I find it's easier. Like it's clearly really doughy. It's clearly like it smells like a candy. Some that I actually really like smell like this kind of burnt rubber dank gas. Um, this I-95, you kind of have to smell it to describe it, but definitely very gassy, just in a very different way than cookies.
Interesting. And how does it yield? Is it a stacker?
Amazing. It's the best per square foot. It's the best yielder I've ever grown.
Wow.
And that's the other thing with modern genetics is they don't really yield well. To find something with cookies in it that really pumps out yield, it's really difficult, let alone finding something that pumps out yield and tests really high, because that's another thing is I have to have really high THC for market demands. And when you get into the ChemDog side of things, even though it's old school and it wasn't bred for high THC, really surprisingly, it hits really high THC. So this one is over 30% all day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you tried growing it in a pot to see if there's a difference between the beds and the pots?
I grew it on a pot, Leighton, but it was in my R&D room. So in my R&D room, I do really small pots with really, really small plants just to cull the high and the low THC, to be honest with you.
Gotcha. Yep.
And then the next time I ran it was in the beds. A lot of hydro growers have actually grown it before me. So I discovered the cut and then I gave it to companies that I work with basically. And they really had a hard time growing it. Like no one's growing it anymore, but it did amazing in living soil. So just a guess, maybe it has specific nutrient requirements that hydro guys aren't necessarily meeting, but then put it in a healthy living soil environment and it does really well because it takes up what it wants. I'm just guessing here. It's surprisingly very, it doesn't like a lot of light, that I discovered. So if I'm over a ppfd of 800, you see symptoms of yellowing, stuff like that. And you clearly see that it's too much light, because if you go more towards the perimeter of the canopy where the light is less intense, they look perfect. So definitely that's something that I learned from that first grow is lower light intensity. But in general, that one did not show that horizontal system symptom that I'm talking about. And it's funny too, because the ones that do show the symptom end up very, very good. I'm not seeing, if I compare to a room with just potting mix pots, it doesn't yield less. In my opinion, it's better quality. So yeah, it's kind of a non-issue, but still it's an imperfection that I'm trying to correct.
All right. So, what is your 20% organic matter made of? What is
It's
the?
made of the O Horizon, and my O Horizon is it goes something like this. It's about 2/3 peat moss and compost and worm castings, and 1/3 pumice.
Got you. So you have your 1/3 aeration, and then you're doing a custom mix on the other ones.
Yeah, and of course that custom mix is amended.
So interestingly enough, you know that they buffer peat moss before they ship it out because they have to.
Yeah, definitely.
It
Yeah,
grows in very, very low pH.
yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that buffer is wearing off over time. And
No, it's not. No, I'm right on target with my O Horizon. So I have a Blue Lab pH meter that's made for soil,
okay,
and I make sure it's calibrated. I check my O Horizon, and it says the exact same pH as test results from Logan Labs.
nice.
So I know I'm on point with it. I even tested my A Horizon with my pH pen and compared it to Logan Labs. It's all the same. So my O Horizon is maintained at the right pH, but then I have a pretty drastically different pH down in the A Horizon.
Do you buffer at all with minerals ever?
For my O Horizon, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
No, I never had to mess with the pH
Okay.
side of things for the O Horizon, because right off the get-go, I think I started, I'd have to check my results, maybe 6.4, 6.5 pH. Now I'm testing at 6.7. So about in a year and a half, it creeped up a tiny bit, but I'm still very well on target.
Now, did the A creep up a little? I think last time we talked, you said it had bumped up a couple of points.
Well, look, I went over my lab tests again, and it's weird because, long story short, I tested my A Horizon. It came back at 5.2. I tested a week later, and it came back at 5.6. Okay, so nothing happened. I think that the first 5.2 was maybe some kind of a mistake, or maybe it was the way I sampled it. Also, that could be an option. That could be a factor. I mean, but when I test it with my pen, it's 5.6.
Okay, all right.
Now, so I think I started the podcast with saying it was 5.2 because I had that first test in mind.
Yeah,
But it seems to be more consistent at 5.6. Matter of fact, before the last grow, I dug a hole down to the A Horizon, stuck the pH meter back in there, and it was still 5.6.
So, have you noticed much of a melding of the O and the A Horizon at the interface?
You mean when I dig?
Yeah.
And yeah, to be honest, I was kind of surprised at how you really see the O and then boom, straight the A. So no, they're not quite fusing yet.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I'm banking on long term, is that it's just going to get better. I'm not rushing into any solutions for to fix this quote unquote issue, because if I was blind, like I couldn't tell. It's more of a visual thing because it doesn't impact the quality of the cannabis. It doesn't impact the yield. So I'm not rushing to do anything about it until I really find a solution. Right now, the only true solution that I can think of would be to pull out my O Horizon, lime it a little bit, and then put it back on. But you're messing with the O Horizon. It's a big
Dude, yeah, it's not worth it.
It's
It's not.
not worth it right now. My other option that I'm thinking of is maybe giving the beds a really heavy drench with a compost extract, because my compost, although it's made out of just wood chips and cannabis waste, it is really high pH. It's I don't remember exactly. I think it was like 8.6, 8.7, something like that. So that could contribute to upping my pH. At the same time, a big drench like that could up my O Horizon. So yeah, I'm not sure. What would you do?
I think I would try it. Maybe just on a small area. So I didn't do the whole bed, but I think that, remember, the humic acid that you're going to get out of that compost extract is a buffer, a chemical buffer. It makes everybody play nice. And so even if your pH is a little off, it's not going to affect your chemistry in any way. And
Totally.
whether it would bump the pH of the A, hard to say. But again, it can't hurt. It's not like
No.
you're not doing anything negative in that
Yeah,
respect.
I can't imagine even drenching the whole beds. What do you think? I have a hard time imagining negative effects.
I agree. I agree.
And I tried in a pot too, where I really like drenched it with a ridiculous amount of compost extract, and I had no negative effects.
Yeah, then let's go for it, man.
Yeah, so that's my next move. That's what I'm going to try. Another thing that I've been thinking about too is maybe watering from the bottom and let it wick up with micronized calcium carbonate. But since it's micronized, it's not really soluble. So is it really going to wick up, or is it just going to fall down on the plastic tray underneath my beds? I'm not sure. It doesn't. And micronized calcium carbonate is not something very common. And if you really want some, it's really expensive. So, yeah.
Again, I don't think it's worth the time.
No, I
It-
don't think so. I don't think either.
Again, if it's not affecting the end goal, which is the yields and the potency, then
Exactly.
it's something to be curious because it's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And did you ever try going back to where you harvested that silt to see if by any chance the silt was the cause of the lower pH? Because again, silt is organic matter, compacts very quickly. Like in most composting processes, over time your pH goes down because it's making more organic acids. So maybe that silt might have been the part of the issue with lowering the overall pH of the rest of it.
No, oddly enough, I tested I tested the sandstone clay
Right.
source without the silt.
Yeah, you tested all the inputs, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. So it didn't change the pH. Now it's difficult to say because like how accurate are the instruments sometimes. So again, when I tested and I got a 5.2 pH, okay, I tested just the sand, salt, and clay with nothing else, and then I tested my sand at the same time. I tested my sand, silt, and clay with the added silt and the added organic matter, which the organic matter was around 6.5, and surprisingly, it came back at 5.2 also. Okay. So then when I tested again a week later, I didn't test just the sand, silt, and clay alone without anything added. I tested the full on sand, silt, and clay, added silt, organic matter, the whole deal. And that's where I got my 5.6. So bottom line, it's definitely not the silt that acidified my scene. Also, I can add to that. Actually, I did this last week. I still had the sand, silt, and clay with nothing added. Filled a pot with it, stuck a pH meter in there, and it was 5.2. Okay, so I'm around 5.2, 5.6, no matter what.
Yep, it's interesting. And when you originally tested all the inputs with Logan Labs,
Yep.
did anything jump out at you when you tested the individual parts? Because I think you had sand from one place, you had a silt and a clay mix together, if my memory serves me correct.
Mostly I had a sand, silt, and clay source, and I felt that the ratios were pretty good. It was definitely a sandy loam, but I wasn't really seeing that separation in the middle where you see the silt. So I added a little bit of silt, and then doing the jar tests, it showed the silt layer when I added that silt. So that's what I went with. It wasn't that complicated there. I really had a sort of baseline, something I started with that is mostly that sand, silt, and clay source.
Got you. And then you just amended it with a little bit more silt just before installing it.
Yeah.
It's still crazy that you're having, that much of a difference between the pH. But again, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. But it's a phenomenon that I'd love to figure out. I'm one of those, inquisitive people, very curious.
We're gonna kind of figure it out because I'm building my other room, like the same room, pretty much, with horizontal beds. But my A horizon, I'm gonna make sure that I have a pH very similar to my O, and we'll see, like if that was what was causing that sort of symptom that we're talking about. That's sort of deficiency.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this being able to start over, is you can really tweak everything that we've learned on the first go around.
Yeah, exactly. Like, would you see an advantage of having a lower pH in the A horizon? I spoke about it with Av once, and he kind of liked the idea that he was saying maybe that fungi would thrive more in a more acidic soil. And since I had a higher pH in my O and a lower pH down there, it might encourage fungi and might encourage a variety of nutrient uptake. And he kind of liked the idea.
Well, you're opening up the ability for those to become available, the different minerals to become available at different pHs. So it is kind of like, if you look at it that way, it's kind of like having the opportunity to have a pharmacy. You can have the best of both worlds. You can have the higher, the general release at the middle in the neutral zone, which is the vast majority of minerals are available at that pH, and then with the lower pH, we'll open up a few different ones. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely interesting. Have you seen, when the last time you did a rhizos test and you showed it was looking like fantastic. Everything was just moving forward. Was that a combination of A and O, or was it just the O?
No, should it have been? Because it was just O.
Well, again, after your next crop, it might be interesting to have you go down to the A and send her a sample of that as well, because maybe
100%.
you will see more fungi, or maybe you'll see less fungi.
Yeah, I'm interested. Like, when you look at soil biology, with a soilless mix like an O horizon, and you're comparing it to an A Horizon, are you seeing the same kind of diversity? Are you seeing as much biological activity in sandstone clay organic matter as you would in just organic matter? Because if I were to guess, like just organic matter would have more biology because it's organic matter. Have you scoped it out?
Yeah, I've actually seen the opposite of that. That I get,
Really?
yeah, and especially with the genetics. When we do DNA testing, we're seeing a much broader spectrum of bacteria. Because remember, with direct microscopy, you're not selecting out individual bacterial species. Yeah, you're picking up actinobacteria, you're picking up general bacteria, and you're picking up fungi, protozoa, and nematodes. But when you get into the weeds, like really deep into the weeds with what all of these individual bacteria do, more often than not, what we're finding out is it's not the individual that matters; it's the community. So within the community, they're creating all of these secondary, tertiary metabolites or metabolic processes that don't occur in a less diverse system. And that was always my bitch with soilless mediums, was that, like, well, I'm going to give you all of these diverse organisms that came from compost, worm castings, and fish brew. Some of them can only live on clay. Some of them can only live on silt, and some of them have to be in certain communities to be able to function. Like, they're only it's like having a village, right? Well, you got a village and the bricklayer leaves town. Well, all of a sudden now you can't build any more chimneys, or you can't fix the facade when the pickup truck backs into the storefront, right? Because you don't have him there. So that's generally the way I look at uh, the overall picture of how you really want to approach getting the highest level of possibilities. And the only way you're going to do that is through diversity. It's like when I make compost, like, I'm not picking a few different things. I'm picking as many different materials, like browns and greens. Like, I'm looking for flowers. I'm looking for different types of grasses. Some of the stuff I've done, when I've been out here in California, especially during COVID, when there really wasn't much going on, I went nuts. Like, I'd go out in my car and just harvest, garbage bags full of stuff, off hiking, or, I'd see a clump of something weird driving by. I'd pull over and go harvest some stuff. And I really found that was really some of the best compost I ever made, was because of that diversity. And I, continue to move forward with that same idea of, like, how do I make the best possible compost? And we had a great podcast with James White, and we started going down the rabbit hole of his latest work. And this too is so important when it comes to diversity. And I don't know if you watched that one, but man, it was so cool to hear him, because I led in with horizontal gene transfer, and he goes, Leighton, it's deeper than that, right? Horizontal gene transfer is when two bacteria come together, they touch, and they exchange fluid via dissolving their outer shell so that they can exchange cytoplasm, the cytoplasm that's in between the inner and the outer wall, and exchange genetic material. Really crazy shit, deep shit. This is a survival strategy that the bacteria have been using since the dawn of time. Well, more interesting that what he's figured out is that sometimes these two bacteria come together, and, like eukaryotes, one will actually be allowed to enter in to the other bacteria via the dissolving of the outside shell, similar to the rhizophagy cycle, where the bacteria will release its outer shell. So it's just the inner shell. All the cytoplasm has been sucked into whatever was taking it in. But more interestingly, once that bacterium enters into the inner cell, it becomes an oregonello. So an oregonello is basically like an organ, like we have organs. And even cooler is that when that cell goes to divide, that oregonello becomes the nucleus of the sister or brother that's coming off of that original organism. You talk about mind bending. Like, you didn't just gene transfer, man. You just created a whole new friggin' species of bacteria. And this has been a real big problem with like moving. Once we started to really crack the can open on DNA, we started to realize that we can't even look at individual species of bacteria because they're evolving so damn fast that by the time you get done the experiment, it's a different bacterium because of horizontal gene transfer, let alone this phenomenon, which I forget what he calls it, but we'll be having him on again in probably another 4 or 5 months. And
I'll have to check it out. To be honest with you, I saw the podcast, and I think it was one of those nights I was kind of burnt out after work, and I was like, "Oof, that sounds heavy." This might have to be for another time, but I'll go back and check it out, 100%.
Yeah, I love him because he's one of the only like super high level scholars that I know that is willing to hypothesize. Like, he's not afraid to like answer a question that's even, outside of his boundaries. A lot of these guys, they have their reputation to worry about, and so they're afraid to go outside of their box and say, hey, I never thought about that, but that's my hypothesis is you're probably right about that. And that's what makes him really cool and a blast to talk with. But yeah, definitely go back and listen to that one because, and you'll hear me and him talking about how critical diversity is. So if you don't have the proper materials, parent materials in your pot, how are you possibly going to have the diversity, the potential diversity of the different bacteria if you don't have those other materials for them to live on? Because that's their job.
Well, really interesting. I'm going to check it out, and really interesting that you're saying that you might even see more diversity and more biology going on in the A horizon than the O. I'm harvesting tomorrow, so I'm going to dig another hole to get a soil sample from the A and get Andy to check it out. And I'll let you know if you're interested anyway to the results just to compare. Are we seeing the type of biology in the A that we're seeing in the O?
And do yourself a favor, and when you fill out the form, make sure you go fill out the form because I know she's getting busy again. Ask her to put it in your history so you can see the last couple of tests.
That's what she's been doing. I love it.
Don't you love that? She's she's awesome, man. She's just amazing.
She's on the ball for sure.
Big time. Big time.
Another thing that I've been looking into a lot is soil testing. So last time I was on, you really dissected the results from that compost test, which I really appreciated. But I'd like to know your thoughts on, again, we're talking about the A horizon a lot. And the Malic 3 saturated paste tests are really more focused for a high tension type of sandstone and clay organic matter soil. What do you have certain targets that you're trying to meet with the A horizon, or is it really target more specific on the O?
So no, I target the A. So I recently did a project where I had a client that wanted to plant 1,600 protea plants in a 1 acre plot out here in Southern California. And the soil was very, very crusty, heavy clay, didn't drain well. So I created them a horizon system. So they basically were drilling 9-inch holes, 24 inches deep, and then putting, the right amount of sand at the bottom, then, the right amount of A at top, and then some compost that I made for them, and then irrigation, then chips on top. And
what do you mean by 9-inch holes? Like they dug
9-inch diameter. So
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it looked like a minefield.
Okay.
But what I did is, back and forth recently last month, since we did the installation, and checking the moisture level, because at the beginning they were overwatering. And so we're starting to get it dialed in. But I've been able to go back with my soil core and bore down at the interface between the existing indigenous soil and the A Horizon, i.e., EAO that we installed.
Yeah.
And it's working beautiful. I mean, I couldn't be more happy that the soil interface is like, the moisture goes out probably at least 24 inches, if not more, from the center. Like I was concerned that it would almost be the opposite. Like all the water would just sit on the bottom of the hole, but
Mhm.
that did not happen. It when they water, I can walk 24 inches at least out away from that hole, uphill, drill it, and get the same moisture level as I do right next to it. So the
Okay.
interface worked perfectly.
Because
Um,
at first your teaching of the A Horizon was you weren't necessarily saying that you should be amending that A. So when you're saying that you're looking for targets, if you're not on target, are you suggesting that we should be amending that A Horizon sort of precisely
so
to balance the chemistry?
through evolution, when I typically would do, whenever I would make a horizontal system, right, or a horizon for any project, whether it was a landscape or a cannabis grow, whatever, I would always do the both the textural test and the soil chemistry test. I don't ever remember amending the A Horizon, although this time I did for a couple reasons. First of all, this plant likes a certain target pH. It's a finicky plant, and it absolutely hates phosphorus. So I went ahead and looked at it like, okay, I want my pH to be a little bit high, like 7.5 for this plant. And I'd like to try to get my saturated paste test to the sweet spot, which is 75% calcium, 17% magnesium, 8% potassium. If you can get to that point, like that just checks a box on something that you don't ever have to worry about again. And so I did. I fucked around with probably, I don't know, 6, 7, maybe 8 different formulas till I finally got the one that I liked the best. And that was using a combination of gypsum, quicklime, or hydrated lime, and lenadite spents. So lenadite spents are like super fine pieces of lenadite that have had the fulvic acid extracted from them. But again, it makes everybody play nice. And so when I got my test results back, it was 73 calcium, 19 19 magnesium, and I think like 9 or 10, whatever the number is, to make it 100%. But
So
it
is
was
that
cool.
mostly what you're looking at, the saturated paste for
Yes,
an A Horizon,
yes, yeah.
not necessarily the Malik 3?
No, the malic is the malic is important because you want to know what your total pool is, right?
Yeah.
Malic is giving you everything that's available in that. Now, I should back up before I say this because I've been doing a lot of work with the Muncher crew and trying to unlock some pretty deep concepts about how the affluent, the DOM, it's called, dissolved organic matter, affects soil aggregation. And one of the things that we started going down the rabbit hole was trying to understand the difference between the total pool, the exchangeable pool, and the soluble of nutrients. And there's a big difference between all of them. Some of these companies are just measuring soluble and exchangeable, and they're not measuring total. Others are measuring total, but not soluble and exchangeable. So I don't believe there is any one company out there at this point in time that does all three. Now, I'm very blessed to have an opportunity to work with Los Alamos National Lab. Don't ask me. I mean, this is like a fucking kid scientist dream come true that I get to go fucking hang with the big boys. But that's going to be one of the first questions we ask them is, hey, in your experience, who out there has the total package, where we can get all three of these versions of what's actually available. So
Mhm.
that being said, the malic is the strong acid, so that's generally considered the total. Uh, Modified Morgan, and there's another one which is a weaker acid. Um, are We're thinking they're more exchangeable, but they may only be soluble. We just don't know yet. So, but that being said, back to the point is that I decided in this case that it made sense to amend the A. And in your
Right.
case, I'm going to recommend you do the same because there's nothing
Yeah.
growing yet. So you have the
So
opportunity to fuck with the chemistry without hurting anything.
yeah. And when you're talking about those particular percentages, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're looking at percentages, you're looking at if things are in balance. Now, are you looking at the amount that is in that solubility, like in the saturated pace? Like, do you
Well,
have target amounts? Because it's not
yes.
just percentages, right? It's also parts per millions.
So I usually go for I scan the whole test, but my main focus on doing the saturated paste is the percentages, because again,
Because
what
you're more worried about balance than actual quantity. Am I
yes,
right?
yes, because the bacteria will release from the total
Right. Right.
based on what the plant's asking for.
And since you correct me if I'm wrong, but since you have basically a whole bunch of sandstone clay, you have a whole bunch of endless minerals tied up.
Yeah, you got thousands of years of
Right. So that's probably why your malic doesn't necessarily matter as much.
correct. Again, it's the malic is important because if you like, you don't show molybdenum or you show a toxic level of selenium or one of these other things, you got to know that going in, or
But
otherwise,
yeah, true that. I think malic does have molybdenum.
yeah, it does.
There's probably a lot of metals that are missing, though, right?
Yep, you do it in most cases. They don't do mercury, they
No,
don't do lead.
that's a separate test.
Yeah, yeah, those are separate tests, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, that's just the way the business model was set up. Is that
yeah,
people don't want to know that, right? So
yeah.
they don't include it in the general testing regimen, which they really ought to, by law, be forced to test all of those things nowadays. Because what we're finding is that more and more these toxic elements are not only, you know, in the top layer of the soil, which indicates that we are contributing to them, that they're precipitating out of the atmosphere and building up on the soil surface. I mean, I got soil tests dated back 15 years, 14 years, and you should see how little aluminum was in the soil back then.
Really?
Unless you were like, I did some manure tests and stuff where the aluminum was through the roof, and that's because the fucking greedy feed companies add the aluminum in to increase the weight of the feed.
No way.
Oh yeah, dude, this is real. Knowing that the animal can't pass it, the animal can't absorb it,
Yeah,
and know that it'll just flush through the animal and come out in their shit. But
crazy.
when you take that horse shit and you compost it at a very low pH,
Yeah,
which is naturally what's going to happen, you're making that shit bioavailable for the plants. Like
yeah,
I would go to these horse manure piles and nothing would be growing on it. And you'd be like, wait a minute, the horse manure is super fertile. Why is there like weeds growing on top of it, not just all the way around it?
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what I came to realize was that was what was going on. And then I have a friend who's very, very deep into feeds. I don't use his name because it's not proper, but he was the one that kind of, because of what he does and the animals that he's feeding, he has to be super super careful about any kind of toxicity. If he loses something, he loses everything, and it's a problem. So he spent years in feed nutrition for different types of animals so that he could protect himself in the business that he does.
Okay.
He's that turned me on to that. And then when I started to pay attention to it, I was like, holy shit, he was right. Look at this. Look at this
Mhm.
manure pile. There's nothing growing on it.
Well,
So
I'm very aware of heavy metals. Trust me, and it's one of the biggest things that I test for because my product needs to test very low.
mhm.
Yeah, really interesting what you're saying. Matter of fact, I've discovered something recently on metals. So last time I was on your show, I was testing a bunch of stuff to figure out why I was testing a little high in arsenic. And I don't want to mention any, again, company names or product names because this is nothing for sure yet. But basically, I built a bunch of different horizontal pots with different components. And I tested the components prior for heavy metals. And I really wanted to try to find a correlation between heavy metal uptake and the amount of heavy metals that were in the components, right?
Mhm.
And I was really surprised because everything tested super low in arsenic. Although one of those pots were the exact same thing as my beds. So I started looking into it, and long story short, I was using a humic acid product that I didn't use in those pots, but I was using it in my beds. And the last grow, I used no humic acid products, and the arsenic went significantly down. That being said, that particular arsenic, that particular humic acid product actually has a very low amount of arsenic in it. Um, I didn't test it myself, to be honest with you, but that company has to register its heavy metals through a California database, and I checked it, and it's just 6 ppm. So in general, it's totally acceptable for agriculture. But I've noticed that when you have, let's say, sand, silt, and clay that has 6 ppms in it, the cannabis plant will hardly uptake any of this. And when I'm just watering it with 6 ppms, it seems to be uptaking it big time. So I think it's something that I've learned, and I still have to do more grows and more testing to really prove this. This is still anecdotal, but it really seems to me that there's a big difference between a sort of bioavailable version of heavy metals versus just heavy metals just mineralized naturally in a natural soil. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely, 100% correct. And
Yeah.
then the bacteria are the ones that either tie it up or loosen it up.
Yeah.
So that particular product is made through a biological fermentation, not a
There you go.
typical acid and bases
Hmm.
fermentation. So that only makes sense that even though it's a very small percentage, that it is biologically available because of the process in which they extracted
Yeah.
the product.
And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my whole understanding of heavy metals in cannabis is that there's nothing really proven where what's a proper threshold for healthy cannabis inhale. So they kind of go ahead and guess those thresholds, and they set them very, very ultra low. So when I'm talking that the arsenic is a little high, I would say that relatively speaking, 0.2 part per million is very low, and it should probably be a non-issue. It's just because of testing standards and regulations, bottom line, that I'm worried about this. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't really, like, for my personal smoke, I wouldn't be worrying about being near zero point 0.2. And to be honest, with that humic acid, I was lower than zero point 0.2 also. Maybe we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of like 0.15, just a little uncomfortably close to that zero point 0.2 threshold. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
So it's not that particular product I'm talking about. Could definitely also be used more in moderation and be fine, because another part of this whole thing was that my first grow in the horizontal beds, I used the humic acids. I would say not too much. Just I applied it, right, and I tested a little higher in arsenic than I was expecting. Again, below 0.2, so it's a non-issue. Um, but then since I was surprised that I tested higher than I was expecting. I went like double heavy on the humic acids, thinking that humic acids would balance things out and give me the like odds of testing lower, but it tested higher, right? Applying
Interesting.
more of it. So anyways, it's still all anecdotal. I wouldn't worry about, again, I don't want to name the product because it's anecdotal. I'm not sure, and used in moderation, it's a non-issue. So let's
Agreed.
not worry too much about this.
Agreed. But again, it's good for the community when anybody discovers something like this, because remember, I had two clients this spring that called me with some issues with their soil, and both of them had like extremely excessive potassium and low calcium. And so in both cases, I was like, all right, man, you got to be showing some kind of deficiency without hardly enough. Their calciums were in the 40s and their potassiums were in the 40s. It was like crazy. And so I'm like, well, how do the plants look? And they're like, well, the plants look fine. I go, that can't be. You should be, in some kind of deficiency or nutrient lockout with those kinds of numbers. And I'm like, all right, so what else do you do? In both cases, the people were using either every week or every other week a humic acid product. And so in this case, I don't know if they're using the same product or not, but it would
Yeah.
be good to let them know that, hey, if you are legal, I think one of them is in the legal space. The other one I think is just a home grower. That they need to know these kinds of things so that they avoid the
Yeah.
potential problem. And we saw this in water soluble kelps. There were heavy metal issues as well as E. coli.
Oh, for sure. Like I tested a really legit source of kelp a little while back, and it came back at 6 ppms, the same matter of fact as that humic acid. And health wise, I would totally use it, but risk wise for my regulated product, I held off.
Yeah,
I didn't use it.
yeah, and there was and that was and there's another one too that was even more crazy. And the fuck was it? It was something like selenium or what the fuck was it? But it was a product that was you wouldn't relate it to any kind of like toxic heavy metals, but it was just loaded with the shit. Hey, Paul, come on, here, come up.
Another thing that I thought was interesting too is so trying to figure out that arsenic problem. And first of all, major mistake on my part for not checking that humic acid input myself for heavy metals. I don't know why the hell I didn't do that, because I test everything. So I tested all my horizons. Everything was super low. So I tested my rocks at the bottom. And initially I thought it was my rocks because the rocks actually tested in the 30 ppms. So I thought, geez, I'm going to have to dig out my soil. It's the rocks. Somehow the plant is mining arsenic from the rock. But I used the same rock in pots, and without using that humic acids product again, I tested super low, and I actually tried it twice with those same rocks, and it tested super low. So just goes to show, again, you could have relatively high heavy metal contents, but if it's tied up and not bioavailable, it's not necessarily going to be taken up from your plant. So there's a lot of differences. Another little tip for maybe the audience about what do we got here? Must be near impossible to get flour on our market. Big up to Tom for making it happen. Yeah, man, it's tough. But I was really overwhelmed with regulations at first when I got this license. I was one of the first in Canada to have a micro cultivation license, matter of fact. So I was really stressed out, really overwhelmed. But you know what? Just sit down, read the regs, take your time, understand, and you can figure it out. You can make it happen. A lot of people were telling me that I was going to fail a lot of things, especially because I was going organic, and it's not true. All right. My microbial levels, my yeast and mold, everything is not even close to failing. And it's totally possible to pass heavy metals also. Another quick little thing, if ever you're listening and you're a regulated grower in Canada, I mentioned this on the last podcast. I'll mention it again today. Long story short, on heavy metals is the government is flexible. Okay, so those thresholds are based on pharmacopoeia standards, and the pharmacopoeia standards are based on consumption per day. So if you're looking at 0.2 parts per million of arsenic in flour being a threshold, that's proportionally based on what a prescription would be of 10 grams per day. So you can easily justify in your SOPs that you don't think your customer is going to go out to the store and buy 10 grams per day of your product. Therefore, you can allow a higher heavy metal content. So getting back to it, just read, understand regulations, and you'll get through the whole thing. But what I was saying is how available metals are, and yeah, I was relieved to know that a little bit higher heavy metal contents in natural soils and in rocks and etc. If they're not in a bioavailable form, it won't necessarily be dangerous to hit high levels. And in general, I found that with soil testing and seeing what my flower is testing, as long as I'm not watering in something that's bioavailable with arsenic, the plants seem to really be not prone to uptake arsenic. So if you're testing high in arsenic in flower, from my observations so far, I might be wrong, but it's probably an input. All right. Now, when you're looking at lead and mercury, no matter what the level of lead and mercury so far that I've seen in soil, luckily cannabis just doesn't uptake it, or very, very little. And for me, actually, the most dangerous one is cadmium, because in my experience, cadmium seems to be a lot easier to uptake for the plant, and it seems to be not based on input. So I don't know if you have any theories on that, Leighton, but it seems like cadmium seems to be more bioavailable in soil in general, and not necessarily again on inputs. Just if there's naturally traces of minerals that is cadmium in your soil, watch out. Your plant might want to uptake it.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about the cannabis plant, is that it's a dynamic accumulator, much like comfrey. It'll pull whatever's in the soil. I mean, you could use it as a soil remediation tool.
Yeah.
But that being said, the real issue is that you look at the periodic table, if you perhaps do not have molybdenum in your soil, but you do have cadmium,
Right. Yeah.
plants can mine the cadmium thinking that it's molybdenum.
Yeah.
And so that's an issue because that's one of those hidden things that people just don't understand is how valuable molybdenum is because it does like I don't know 6, 7, 8 different plant micro processes
Hmm.
um, that require just a tiny, tiny little bit. But if you
Yeah.
don't have at least 2 parts per million in your soil, you need to add it
Yeah.
because
Well,
you're
I've been trying to reach that 2 part per million in the soil, and interestingly enough, I can't. But my theory is that as I'm amending molybdenum, the plant is taking it up,
exactly,
right?
dude.
Because the compost that I made with cannabis only actually tested pretty high in molybdenum, while my soil tests are consistently coming back after crops low in molybdenum. So yeah, I thought that was interesting too. Um, Another subject that I wanted to talk about, if you don't mind, is we were talking about a horizon and soil testing. So really interesting that you're looking at saturated paste and you're looking at mostly the balance with percentages. We're now focusing on pH also. Now for the O horizon, I'd like to give you in the audience an idea of how I've been interpreting soil test results. And I'd like your opinion on how I'm doing it, and I'll tell you where I'm taking my recommendations. Um, so I'm taking my recommendations right now, and I'm open minded to changing because I'm always learning and I'm always looking for a second opinion. So a lot of people in the industry, this guy's very popular, Brian Mason. You've probably heard of him, the soil doctor. It's very easy to go on his website, just input Logan Lab test results, and it spits out a recommendation. That being said, I've been doing that, and so far I've been having great crops. I've been having luck, but also in my experience and my observations of living soil is living soil can be very forgiving. So are those recommendations really maximizing things? Is it really on point? I'm not sure. I'm not an agronomist. So I sent Ken some soil results that I consider to be on target. And when I say I consider, it's pretty much Brian Mason's opinion that this is on target. And I'd like to have your opinion because obviously I very much respect your opinion, Leighton.
So I think
Um,
he's the soil doctor.
yeah,
Okay.
that's
Yeah,
that's sort of his brand name there.
he built a pretty powerful algorithm
It's
to
really
manage.
convenient, really convenient.
Yeah, right. Which is fantastic. I think that that's a great advance. That guys 10, 15 years ago, it would have killed to have that kind of information.
Big time. Yeah.
I mean, back then it was just a handwritten recipe of how to make your super soil.
But the big thing about that, and continue, I don't want to cut you, but the big thing also that I would like to add in the conversation is that it's all based on Malic 3 and saturated paste tests. And those are traditionally used for, say, a traditional sand, silt, and clay organic matter soil. So the way I understand it is he has his own way of sort of observing and interpreting his own interpretation of these results to fit for more an O horizon or a potting mix type of situation where you, Leighton, and I was talking to Ab, and he has the same opinion, is that maybe a compost test is better. So what I actually did is I gave Ken saturated paste and malic 3 from Logan, which the soil doctor would consider to be pretty close to target. And then I took that same soil and actually had a compost test done. And it'd be interesting to see the cross reference if you think that my compost test is on target, because correct me if I'm wrong, again, I've been saying that a lot tonight, is that might be the more traditional way to assess an organic matter type of soil versus a sandstone clay. So maybe you could enlighten us in the correlation between both. So yeah, this is the compost test, and this is the O Horizon.
Yep. So Logan Labs actually sends that test out because they don't have
they do.
capacity to do it. So, but the hard part is that all of a sudden now you're looking at percentages and pounds per ton versus parts per million, right?
Right.
So this again is, I'm in the process right now of trying to figure out a way to better figure out the difference between apples and oranges so that we can compare it. And again, I give big kudos to the soil doctor for altering his algorithm to make up for the difference between an organic compost test versus a organic material being tested through Malic 3.
Okay. So
again, we don't know the total exchangeable and soluble pools yet. And that's something that, again, I'm working on to try to figure that out so that we can easily have a way to, you're at this, you did a parts per million or you did a percentage. All you have to do is have a cofactor of this.
Right. So if I were to, if a cultivator was to call you and say, Leighton, what do you think I should amend? Would you be more prone to looking at the compost test or the saturated paste and malic 3s?
I would ask for the compost test.
Yeah.
For sure. And then I would try to then calculate over, to a way to recommend them to amend that part of the piece.
So just for fun, just a quick look at that compost. What do you see? And
Ken put it back up. I talked over you, so we didn't get a chance to really look at it.
Is there something that jumps that's really off to you?
See, look, you have two different pools of potassium. You're going to have multiple pools of phosphorus. Surprised they didn't have nitrogen total and then available nitrogen. Scroll down a little bit more, if you wouldn't mind. See, carbon's a big one right there. We're doing a lot of discussion on understanding the forms of carbon in the soil. And one of the important phenomenons to understand is that when you have no carbon in the soil, so no organic matter, you're basically like running on a dead battery, and you're going to have to keep applying shit over and over and over again. And the other side of that coin is if you're applying nitrates and you don't have any carbon in the soil, you're going to lose the vast majority of it because it can only be metabolized by the bacteria using carbon as a fuel source to break it down and open it up.
If there's not enough carbon, it's going to gas off.
It's going to gas off, or it's going to wash away. It doesn't turn into a organic form that can store naturally in the soil like carbon. And then if you're using ammonia-based products, you're going to burn a lot of water to make those available. So again, the carbon pool is like it's like the bank account, right? If you have a nice fat checking account and a savings account, and you're getting a paycheck on a regular basis, and your accounts are building up, it gets to a certain point where the bank's going to go to you, hey, we really like you. we're going to offer you a low interest credit card and maybe some financial services, right? You just have all these more options. So one of the things that really dialing in on in the last few months has been, what is the variable? What is the carbon variable? What's the carbon factor? So as that organic material breaks down and converts to fines, that carbon is moving down into the soil system, down into the A horizon, and again creating a pool, a bank. So that carbon number that was in there is really good to see. And we hadn't gotten to the ash yet, so if you could pull it back up, your pH.
So let me ask you, C to N ratio, so carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you're seeing 36, does that make sense to you? Like, is it a good number for an O horizon?
So what that means is that this would be considered a not complete, so not not aged, not mature. There's a term for it. It needs longer to. Fuck! I can't believe I had a brain lock. Bottom line, you want to see that C to N ratio down, below 20.
But is the C to N ratio down below 20? Is that more for an actual compost?
Well,
let's not forget, like, there's a bunch of pumice in here. I don't know if that affects the situation. And there's amendments, and it's a potting mix. It's not compost.
Right. So what I was trying to say is that mature compost is going to be 20 or below. But you're absolutely right. You skewed these results because you sent in a test. You sent in a material that was a super soil, not just a compost.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and that's what this is all of what I'm getting at is there seems to not be a proper lab test for a potting mix,
that's why Soil Doctor did what he did.
Yeah. Okay.
Because again, he's testing super soils, not an inert potting mix or not a compost, because a compost is so complex compared to inert potting soil, right? It's a different friggin' ballpark, especially taking into consideration the variables of compost.
And I cut you off there. You were going to look at other. I'd be interested if just a quick look on it. Is there anything that jumps off that you're like, dude, that's way wrong?
No, I mean, again, you have nice pools. Is there anything below that C to N ratio? I forget. It's been a while since I looked at one of these. No, I think that's the end of it, right?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah,
okay, the reason why
there's
like that page is I triple checked Logan to make sure that they were giving me same results on the same compost on the same sample. So I'm sorry if ever Logan is watching or something, but I was making sure that you weren't bullshitting me.
Who wasn't bullshitting you?
The lab.
Oh.
Like I sent the exact same sample, and I pretended that it was 3 different sources.
And how well did it come back?
Well, let's check it out there. I think it's all pretty damn similar, except maybe one C to N ratio is pretty significantly different, if I'm not mistaken. See, that was 35. Yeah, that one out of nowhere, 54.
So another interesting thing is that I had a long conversation with a couple of different lab managers at different labs. Probably shouldn't name names, so I'm not going to. And one of the interesting things that basically came out of the conversation was that the industry standard for deviation between samples is a ridiculously high 20%.
Okay.
Is acceptable, right? That's acceptable. That's not to say that it doesn't go over that in a lot of these labs. And the other part of the puzzle is that they're supposed to be cleaning and calibrating a lot more than they do, but because everything's so tight nowadays and has been for, let's face it, the last probably 3-4 years, probably 4 now, based on what happened to the world,
Yeah.
that it's just not happening like that anymore because
Yeah.
people are just trying to hold on and stay alive, whether you're a business or an individual. And this is one of the reasons why I loved Micro Macro as a lab. Was that was a third generation lab, or at least 2 generations. Dad was the one that started it, and I think maybe it was her grandfather or dad that did it. And they sent you calibration before the test and after, so you could see that that before was 0, 0, 0, 0, the test, and then after 0, 0, 0. And then they used my after test for the next person's test because it showed that the instrument was completely wiped. There was nothing in it. And so, they didn't have to test before and after every single test. They would use the tests that they did for the one before for the next one, which was a great philosophy, business practice.
Yeah.
Now they were almost twice as much as Logan.
Yeah.
But it was worth it to me because at the end of the day, Logan's not going to kill you. So even if you double it and you charge 120 versus 60 for the package, the complete plus, it's still a way better test because I verified that this is as close to what I could possibly get.
Well, that's what I've been doing whenever something is not too expensive. I double and triple check stuff. So if it's a $50 test, like relatively speaking for my operation, that's nothing. I'll triple check just to make sure that it's accurate. And if it's not exactly accurate, well, then I'll start going by averages and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I did the same thing recently for aerometers. So I just thought, well, I'm not just going to base my watering off of one aerometer. So I took like 4 aerometers and put them all one next to the other.
Yep.
And I discovered that one was way off. So, there was a 25% chance that I was making like totally incorrect decisions if I would have just got that one aerometer. And I went further and I double checked that again, where I put the same aerometers, the same 4 aerometers at different spots in the bed to see if it was just maybe a pocket that was different, but it was not. Like that aerometer was always off of the other ones.
Did you try recalibrating it, or did you have to send it back?
I didn't send it back. I just quit on it. But yes, I did try recalibrating it. With aerometers, it's not necessarily a calibration. It's more of how you put the water in it, making sure there's no air bubbles and there's a way to pump it. Mm-hmm. Have you done that?
Yep. I call that a calibration. It is.
Okay. Well, I guess. Yeah. So I did try to recalibrate. I recalibrated it and
multiple times.
Yeah.
So you obviously had a flaw in the stone. The stone is what that thing on the bottom is basically
either that or the gauge is really finicky. And I've ordered quite a few so far, and quite a few come in just not even working at all. So I don't know if they get broken in the shipping or what it is, but yeah, that thing's can be really finicky. You really got to watch when you pump it to really like follow the instructions exactly right, or you're going to fuck things up.
Oh yeah. They're a bitch to get calibrated or set up or whatever, however you call it. But they're a fantastic tool when you get them working.
Yeah. And I was interested too, like we were looking at the compost test. Let's say I would just quickly go over a saturated paste and Malic 3. Do you even have any opinions on that stuff? If I tell you the targets, can you tell me if you think it makes sense, or you're just not really familiar with the potting mix?
So this is from Soil Doctor on what he recommends based on his algorithm for this super soil that was run with a Malik 3.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Would it be helpful if I go over the targets?
Yeah, sure. Let's whip
And
it up.
these are targets taken from just watching podcasts and me taking notes, because he doesn't necessarily like tell you the targets. You have to take his course to have all the real targets. But I spent the time that it took to really have a good general idea. So if you want to go over it quickly, and I'd love to just sort of know your opinion.
Sure.
If anything jumps out, let's check it out. Maybe start with the Malik 3. So the Malik 3, basically the way, is that the Malik 3?
It looks like the saturated paste based on the color.
Yeah, it's a saturated.
Yeah. I got 4 called
Malik 3.
You didn't send me a Malik 3. You sent me
it's standard. Sorry. Malik 3 is standard.
Okay, that's just and one's on the O and one's on the A. Do you want the O or the A first?
Let's do just the O.
You did an A recently?
No, when I built the beds.
Oh, so this is an old one.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at the one that soil doctors, your interpretations of soil doctors.
Right. So that would be from the O, because he's not really talking much about A horizons. Most of his clients are all in potting mixes, right?
No.
Just a second. Are we sure that this is an O? Yeah, it's an O horizon because the pH is 6.5. So basically, all he's looking for in a standard test, he says that he's skipping a whole bunch of things off the standard Malik 3 test. He's looking at soil pH mostly. If we look at organic matter, it says 14%. This is totally incorrect because it's mostly organic matter for sure. The same O horizon stent over and over gives me different organic percentages, and himself, Brian Mason, says don't go by that. It's inaccurate for some reason. I don't understand why. Now, if we go lower, he skips the sulfur and he goes to phosphorus, just up from calcium, Ken. So if we look at phosphorus, there's something a little off with this test. It reads in ppms and he goes by pounds per acre. So he's looking for around 1,500 pounds per acre. So I'm not sure what that translates to in ppms, but I actually went over this exact soil test with him personally, and he was okay with that 179 ppms. For phosphorus. I don't know if that jumps out to you as being a good number or not.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because he has kind of had a reputation of having
high phosphorus.
Being very liberal with phosphorus. And
yeah,
I don't really have a problem with it because, again, he's playing on a different level, and I don't completely understand his algorithm. And he's probably not using phosphate solubilizing bacteria. So the number has to be higher, because organic phosphorus or phosphate is one of the hardest compounds to break down if you don't have phosphate solubilizing bacteria. Now, that being said, over time, in a healthy soil system, so not a compacted, depleted moon dust, you will eventually be able to start accessing some of that phosphorus. But another really interesting conversation I've had with multiple, both lab techs as well as lab supervisors and soil scientists say, the phosphorus pool in our soils is out of control, because we've been using, we've been told, oh, you need rock phosphate, you need this. And we've been pounding our soils for years with these materials. And again, because phosphorus does not volatilize like nitrogen, it just has built up. And we have these incredible pools. So That's where I've always been like, well, I don't really think you need much phosphorus, as much phosphorus as you say. But
Yeah.
then you look at it like, well, he's a chemistry guy, not a biological guy. So he probably hasn't made that connection.
And let's take this with a grain of salt because I'm talking about his thoughts on this and I'm not him. So, take it with a grain of salt. We'd have to ask him personally. I just wanted to, I'm really interested in your views and going over these numbers with you if anything pops up. He does say that he's not really that worried about phosphorus on the malic 3. He's more worried about what's in the saturated paste, and
Mhm.
we'll go over that in a bit. So basically, in the standard test, so the malic 3, he's skipping calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So we can just skip right over that and go down to can the trace elements. And he's looking at copper and zinc. And basically, I think that I was on a pretty good target with the copper and zinc when I heard him speak about it. His standard test that he had on hand had 0.96 of copper, and that was too low. And zinc was 1.7, that was also too low. But I'm above those two numbers on mine, and he was comfortable with them, I think. Um, is that kind of
The only thing that jumps out at me is like, all right, maybe boron's a little low, maybe zinc's a little high, but copper looks
okay?
in, everything else looks fine. I mean, iron's good to have in the soil. Molybdenum you're missing. You need to add more, obviously, because your
For
plants.
sure, for sure. And I've been working on that. Again,
Yeah,
I can't seem to have
that's
it
all
go
right.
up,
It's
but
all
it's
right.
in the plant.
Yeah,
It's
that's
yeah.
all that matters is the plants are good.
So yeah, he's skipping a lot of stuff. The only thing that's left
Let's
is
do a silicon.
nitrates, and
Silicon.
his
Yeah,
target for nitrate is 100. I'm at 112.
yep. So you're right in line there.
Makes sense to you?
Yeah, estimated nitrogen
All
release
right.
looks great. EC looks fine.
Yeah.
Silicon is good. You've got a nice level of silicon. Um, Everything
And
else looks
this test was about a year ago, and the reason why I picked this one for the show was because it happened to be after a cycle, but it happened to be like still pretty damn close to target. So after that cycle, I actually didn't re-amend.
and it ran.
I could show you post cycles, like after cycle results that would be totally different, that would be deficient, and I would be amending there. But how about we skip to saturated paste? Just quit.
So did you? So you ran this. This was after the run. You ran it again. Did you have to amend it the third time you ran it?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So I did a run after this. So a second run, no amending. But then my levels went down quite a bit after that, and I did re-amend.
gotcha.
Yeah. So then, if we're looking at saturated paste, um, so again, my pH is the same. It's 6.5. Like I said, if we go back a year later, if we go forward, I mean a year later, in the present time, I'm more at 6.7. So it did go up a little bit. I think that's normal. Soluble salts. I'd like your opinion on this. The way that I'm interpreting soluble salts is how much minerals I have basically in solution, and it gives me an idea of how heavily amended my soil is and whether I should be thinking of amending my soil or so basically whether I should think about upping my quantities or if I'm on target with soluble salts, it's more about I'm gonna have to make sure that things are in balance more. So when he's looking at what's available in solution, he's looking for 900 to 1200 in a range, but he's also flexible in that. So when I'm looking at 787 here, we have Maybe I could have a little bit more soluble salts in solution, but I'm still close.
Personally, I'd have said that's high for a living soil.
Okay.
For a living soil, but again, remember, he's more of a, he's more of a salt farmer for the most part, right? Isn't his primary principles more based on soil chemistry and not soil biology?
Can't speak for him, but definitely yes. When you say salts, he's definitely all about organics.
But you
No
still
synthetic.
there's still a lot of minerals that are in salt form.
Of course,
So,
yes. Yeah.
So here again, and as long as the plants are performing and they're not taking up a ton of salt, then
Yep.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Yep.
But to me, I would be like, oh, that's a little high. Now,
Okay,
where's the EC? Let's zip to the EC, because this is another thing you got to kind of correlate to.
Well, from my understanding, the soluble salts is the equivalent of EC. Like you can convert. There's a calculation to be made where you could take soluble salts and turn it into EC. Am I wrong about that?
No, EC is the measurement, the unit of measurement, but that helps to calculate the salts. Absolutely. But
So
again,
is it like a 1 EC is maybe like times 600 or something when you're converting it to ppms?
That's another one that
It's not really that. I just threw out that number, but I think I'm in the ballpark there.
Yeah, that's another one that has to be validated.
Because no, there's no EC value in a saturated paste, unless I'm missing something.
That's why I know I was going to try to tell Ken, pull up the other one real quick and let's look at the EC and then bounce back to this one.
Okay, let's see if there's an EC in the standard paste.
There should be
the standard.
The chemistry. There it is, right there. 1.72. So that's low. That's a low. That's okay. So yeah, all right. We're in a good place.
Okay,
So
cool.
just because you're at 787, but your EC is only 1.8, that means to me you're not a salt farm. You're not running high salts.
Okay. Now, if we skip to chlorides, so would you say you'd be okay in that 9 to 12 range if we're looking at this, or should I be lower than 9? You
know what? I'm gonna leave it as undecided. Like okay. I like to see salts lower. I'm all about salts lower because, but again, if your EC is low, that indicates that, in my mind, that your salts are not a problem at this point in time. If that EC was higher, I'd be like, oh fuck, your plants are gonna start taking up salts. But again,
so let's understand this. How can there be an EC value on a standard test where things aren't in solution? Because I can see that how you would measure EC in solution. How are you measuring EC not in solution?
So you'd have to go back to lab testing methodologies, because even in like these tests, like certain parts of this test are tested this way, other elements are tested other ways. So they're not always the same method is used in the chemistry versus the saturated paste.
Okay.
All right. So there's probably 4 or 5 different sub-tests that are being done in the main chemistry test, whereas the saturated paste test is a saturated paste test. That's its own test.
Okay. So if we go back to the saturated paste test now, next we have chloride. That's elevated. And that's because that's back in the days where I was remineralizing my RO with a CalMag. And that CalMag was apparently organic, but I don't think calcium chloride is really technically considered organic. So I was adding a CalMag that had calcium chloride. It was elevating my chlorides. I since stopped doing that. I've realized that remineralizing water maybe isn't as important as I thought it was, and that can be another discussion. Basically, I'm more comfortable though having minerals in my water, so now I'm putting a small amount of gypsum in my water. That being said, me stopping using that CalMag drastically reduced my chlorides.
Good.
So all good.
All good.
Bicarbonates, 44. Let's see. He wants to see under 100 to 120. So it's all good.
Yep.
Now if we're looking at sulfur, he wants to see 40 to 75. So I'm a little high on sulfur, I guess.
Yeah, sulfur doesn't scare me. Sulfur's
Okay.
a pretty, easygoing guy in the pool.
Okay.
So typical soils have lots of sulfur in it, so I'm not concerned about that one.
Okay. It's phosphorus. Again, some of these numbers were taken from a soil test results that he was looking at live and saying that if he was okay with it or not. So, for example, I have here 2.9 he was okay with. I don't know if that's his precise target or not, but he was okay with 2.9. I'm showing 3.2. I'm close. You okay with that number?
Yep. I'm not scared of that one.
Okay. Now, when we go to calcium, he's looking for around $170. So 170. I was a little low on my calcium here, 116.
Can we scroll down a little bit here, Ken? Down to the percentages. Okay, there we go. So here's where I go on this test right out of the gate. Percentages. Calcium, I want to see 70 or 70, 75 is perfect in my mind. And so with his test, what he was telling you is you were about half of the value you were supposed to be, or what it was, not quite half, right? What did he say again? Was
170,
and you're at?
I was. If you go a little bit more up,
there we go.
Here we have calcium at 116.
So you're 1/3 low.
Yeah.
All right, back down to the percentages. Bam. If you take that number and divide it in half, so call it 25. So 25 plus 50, where are you at, dude? Yeah. So that guy is spot the fuck on with his calcium.
I'm really happy that we're agreeing.
Yeah. So in my mind, when I see this, I'd be like, okay, you know what I really want you to do is I want you to do a calcium flush. Because I want to build your calcium. I want to knock potassium down. I want to knock sodium down, and mag will just have to come down over time.
He's big on gypsum, and it's funny because I've heard Leighton being like against gypsum. Are you okay with using gypsum?
I am okay with it, but you can't be a fucking moron. And that's why Elaine is all like, oh, don't use gypsum, because every friggin' farmer in the country overuses gypsum, and eventually it builds up and creates a crust on the soil, and that crust prevents moisture from getting in, prevents oxygen or what we call gas exchange from happening. So she's right to say don't use gypsum, because farmers overuse the shit. So
let's say I'm not experiencing hydrophobic conditions ever. Would that mean that I'm not overusing it?
No, you're in a different animal. You're in a totally different animal. You're not in a traditional ag beat up soil. You're in a living soil system. So when you use gypsum, you are going to increase your sulfur to some degree, right?
Yeah.
So when you have a high sulfur already, which again, I'm not afraid of sulfur for the most part, as long as it doesn't get out of control. If it gets out of control, then it starts to crust and fuck shit up.
Well,
right?
his big thing too about the sulfur in gypsum is that he says that it doesn't go, it will only go soluble so much. So you could add a shitload of gypsum, but there's never going to be too much available in solution. Would you say that's correct?
I would stand behind that, because again,
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of sulfur, but in a different soil system, I'm really afraid of it.
Okay. Okay. Okay, well, super interesting. Another big thing about those percentages that he advocates, and I'd really like, I'd be super interested in your opinion on this, is we were looking at the percentages. So we looked at calcium. If we skip magnesium for just a second and we look at potassium and sodium, he really wants to see the percentage of potassium above the percentage of sodium. And if your sodium, like here, I'm too high in my sodium percentage, he says that it's going to start creating problems. Are you as worried about sodium as he is?
Yeah, that's why I told you, if this was me, I'd have told you, you need to do a calcium flush right away.
Okay.
And the
Yeah.
calcium flush is going to wash the calcium down. It's going to knock the sodium and the potassium off of the cation exchange sites.
Yeah.
Because remember, sodium and potassium are single bonded electrons, where calcium is a double bond. I'm pretty sure magnesium is a double bond too, but it's been a minute since I've looked at that one. But I know
Okay.
magnesium doesn't fall off the sites as easy as sodium and potassium.
And another thing that you have to keep in consideration too, if you're looking at this in terms of percentages, is that your sodium percentage could be higher than what you want relative to your potassium percentage, but it might mean that you're just a little deficient on potassium. So if you add potassium, you might correct that imbalance, right?
Potassium and sodium are going to have the same bond charge. So the only way to get rid of them is to have a bond charge that's more magnetic.
But I'm not necessarily talking about getting rid of the sodium. I'm saying to make the
Well,
ratios more
again,
favorable.
I think we're talking about the same thing in two different languages.
Okay,
I
because
think that's his point. His point is, you don't want sodium above potassium, because now your plant's more likely going to pull salt than it is potassium, because you have more of it.
yeah,
So
and
it's
that
just,
problem was fixed. Also, again, this is a 1-year-old test.
Mhm.
I have lowered my sodium. If we go back and we look at in the solution, not in the percentage, so a little up, you see that my sodium here is at 40, and he says that around 30 is low and great. So I don't know if 40 is considered high to you
I don't like sodium. I don't
at
want to
all.
see it. I don't want to see it.
Okay. Because is there a way to have like zero sodium? Do you see that sometimes in a saturated paste?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Zero. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the best way
But
I think to
again,
get rid of it again
again,
is a flush.
yeah, again with a calcium flush. But again, dude, you're in a different animal. You're not in a soil that's you're in a friggin' Ferrari, not in a
Right.
regular friggin' Highlander that
Yeah.
most people drive. You're what you've built is something to perform, to
Yeah.
make these plants just perform. You're
Yeah.
gonna have sodium. You can't get away from those things. There are certain minerals that you have to amend with that are going to have those sodiums. I just want to see them get off the bank account. I just want to see them knocked off the bank account as low as you can get that down.
Yeah.
And
And
again,
for that
I don't give a shit about EC, right? I
yeah.
don't give a shit about EC. I don't care if your EC is fucking zero. All I care about is the biology, right?
Mhm.
If you've got a really good biological report and I
Yeah.
see zero sodium and zero EC, I'm fucking good. I'm happy
Okay.
keeper. And so were your
Okay.
plants.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
So when you're talking about that soil, that calcium flush, how do you perform that? Like what type of calcium and how much of a flush do you mean? Like, do you mean a flush with a runoff?
With water, extra water. So yeah, you're pushing a rain event. You're pushing
Until you see runoff at the bottom of your bed.
yeah. I want to see that water overflowing out of the
Yeah,
little.
and you get rid of that water.
Yes, that water
Yeah.
gets tossed. You
Okay.
basically made like a salt water, seawater.
Yeah.
Is
Yep.
what you're.
Okay, nice. The potassium now, all that I can say is that he was looking at a result of 230 and saying that was too high. See, I'm down very low, I think, at 55. Would you say you have a target necessarily for potassium or?
So in organic soils, in compost specifically, you are going to have excess potassium, right?
Yeah.
It's in a bank. It's your bank account.
Yeah.
So I want to see again. I don't really even care about those what's in solution as far as the potassium is concerned. I
Okay.
more care about the
What's in
percent.
the bank?
Yeah, what's in the bank, baby. It's all about what's
Mhm.
in the bank. Because if you're using compost, your percentages are in line. That as the plant needs it, it'll be able to mine it. So
Right.
the ppm is really kind of not something I focus on. But again, he's dealing with a different animal. He's not.
Yep.
He's not doing. He's not working in what I typically work in.
Yeah.
You follow me? And
Totally.
again, if he ran down the biological rabbit hole, he might even change some of his opinions.
It's getting dark.
Yeah, and you got like 4 questions, and we're only got 4 minutes left. So I don't
Sure.
know if there's anything else you want to talk about. We'll do that. We'll blow off the questions. But if you want,
No, we went over a bunch of stuff, and yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on again.
yeah, dude, you're almost a regular.
Totally. It's for a long time, Leighton, I watched your podcast and just kind of dreamt of being on one. I just saw you as a star, right? So it's such a privilege for me to be a regular on your show. Oh my god, I love it. Anytime you want me on, I'm here.
Good. Well, we'll keep you as a regular. Every 4 or 5 months, whatever works for you. But you bring a lot of information to the audience. So you're just as much a rock star as I am, my friend.
I appreciate it, and I'm always trying to push the envelope. And I know I have a lot of questions for you. So yeah, I'd love to have some questions from the audience just quickly.
Yeah, let's fire them up, Ken.
Sure. Actually, Super Nessa wanted to point out, just because the tree has been chopped, the wood chips still contain sap. When the stuff goes sour, it is nasty. Sounds like fermented tree sap that's causing the pH problem.
I don't think it is because he doesn't have a lot of chips in the.
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, I think we were talking back on the compost test when you were looking at the compost test. So if that makes any difference.
Well, yeah, my compost turned out to be really high pH,
which is very unusual. But anyway,
and you're using compost and wood chips and cannabis in that compost.
Yep,
it's only aged wood chips and cannabis waste.
Okay, so that would have been the connection he was making there. So Yellow Skunk Farms, I put silt in a bucket and fill with water. The silt will go back into the proper layers on its own. Then drill holes in the bottom of the bucket, soil on top of the silt. And he's just saying how he does it to set up his particular system. Would you think that would be a good system, Leighton?
So I don't know if he's like, because he uses the word silt. I think maybe he meant to say soil.
No, we were talking about silt earlier.
But silt is its own thing. So because of specific gravity, sand settles out first, silt second, clay last, organic matter last. So you're going to get the sand on the bottom, silt, clay, and any organic matter will be just like either floating on the surface or just kind of bouncing off the surface of the clay. So silt doesn't naturally form layers unless it has other things in it.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Where clay can be nano clay or clay platelets. Silt is traditionally the same anywhere you go. It's going to be this dark chocolate particulate size. I forget the micron, but it doesn't vary that much. There's that is basically a homemade textural test, and you can see the different layers.
That's mine.
That's
I'm working on stuff right now.
So is the bottom then the silt?
That would be sand. It looks like in his case, he had a really weird sandy, silty material that we couldn't really get the layers.
This is a different material though, Leighton. I find that you can see the layers a lot more clear.
Nice.
Like that's silt right there to me.
Yeah, and then the black is the organic matter sitting on top of it.
Yeah.
You just don't have any clay.
I don't have any clay.
It doesn't look like
I would say the like that sand in the middle there's silt, and that lighter color it would be clay, no?
I don't see the silt line. Maybe it's my phone.
I think it's just the picture, like in real life.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, there it is. Okay, now I'm seeing it. Now,
okay, thank goodness. Yes. I was like, whoa, I'm way off here.
No, you have a lot of clay.
Yeah,
you have a lot of clay.
Yeah, and that's why this is the my building block soil that I want to use, and I want to add more sand to it, and of course more organic matter.
Yep.
Yeah. Funny enough, like where you buy this is called garden soil. I asked them for the ratios, and they say that 50% of this is compost. Clearly, it's not.
Well, compost can break down the silt.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. Like, is that a possibility that's what's going on?
Hell yeah.
Okay. Well, that's probably it. I can get back to you if you're interested, but they say that their topsoil has no compost in it, and that's the only difference. So what I did today, I went there and took a sample and shook their topsoil to see if I'm gonna see as much of a silt layer, and I'm gonna see if that silt is coming from that compost, because that was my main question.
Yep.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. But of course, if my silt in my soil came from the compost, it's okay. It's still silt, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So we got one final one here. What source of calcium would be good choice for that flushing?
Good question.
So that would be your quicklime. And just when you add it, you got to go really slow. Like, don't throw a fuck ton of water at a big bag of quicklime. It'll just fucking turn into a shit show. You got to just slowly stir it in. Another one is I tried BioAg's Calmino. It moved the needle a little bit, but because it's an amino acid, it doesn't bond to the sites as well as I'd hoped. Then there's a product called Hortical. I know you can't get it, Tom, but here in the U.S. we can get it. Hortical comes in, I think around, it says on the bottle it's only 5%, but when you test it, it comes back like more to 7 to 8%. But that's a great source of calcium. It's already liquefied, easy to use. I've applied it on a number of different projects and had really good results with it, helping to bump those. But if
you're
you want
not down with putting gypsum in the water and flushing,
well, yeah, gypsum will help, but you're going to bang your sulfur. So in my situation, I can't do that. In your situation, in a living soil system, you can get higher sulfur. Okay. So you could use gypsum as well. But remember, gypsum is higher in sulfur than it is in calcium. And if you're trying to bang off those sites, you want You want to have a higher concentration of calcium and less of a.
You're not worried lime will up your pH?
Of course, it's going to up the pH.
Yeah,
but
it's not a concern.
Well, again, because in a biological system, the pH is going to be regulated by the plant. And I had this exact situation on another project where the client was extremely concerned about pH, and I was like, "Well, you need more calcium, dude." And he was freaking out that his pH was going to go up too high. And I'm like, because you're a living soil system, please trust me. Just do it on a small area if you're concerned, and watch what happens. So he did it on a small area, had wonderful results. pH went up, fucking like 8 or something ridiculous, but then it fell back down over the course of
Okay, nice. So like lime isn't really soluble. You just shake it in your tank until it just mixes and drench.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, we're through the questions. It's been 2 hours, 5 minutes. I got 2 puppies ready to go for a walk. And I just want to thank you again, Tom, for sharing all of your knowledge and asking such in-depth questions, because I think that this is a great way to suss out shit out of me that I probably wouldn't ordinarily talk about, because, without a hard question, it's not easy to just spout the stuff on and on. So thank you for participating.
I thank you guys, both you and Ken, endlessly. I've learned so much from your podcasts. Thank you. And I've heard you before we go, Leighton, I heard you once say that you felt like you've taught everything that you knew to the community, but I disagree. There's endless education that we can pick from your brain, man. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that you do the service to the community.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm a firm believer of you get what you give in life. So the more I give, the more I seem to get. And you're right. We have been diving pretty hard on a few topics in the last 6 months that they're not ready. They're not to fruition for me to really get into yet, but there will be a new chapter of some deep knowledge spinning coming up soon. So,
and Lily says Leighton is not going anywhere.
No, she'd call me and come down here and beat the shit out of me if I tried to get off this podcast.
Yep, pretty much. So, guys, next week we have Dennis Meehan back. So that's going to be a really amazing conversation, because who knows where that one's going to go.
Another spiritual deep dive.
You know it.
Awesome.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, everybody in the audience. Ken, as always, thank you for all your behind-the-scenes work and pulling this together and having it happen. And Tom, we'll see you back in 4 or 5 months, brother.
Damn right.
All right,
guys.
Peace out,
everybody.
Peace.